It started like any other day on the outpost. Earth's last bastion against the stars, the Argent Spire station, floated in its silent vigil near the edge of the Andromeda Gate. Humanity had endured countless waves of alien invaders for decades, each attack more devastating than the last. The station's corridors, once bustling with hope and progress, now echoed only with the footsteps of the weary and desperate. Eli Ward didn't stand out here. He was just another engineer, one of thousands working tirelessly to patch up the endless damage inflicted by the enemy's relentless assaults. He preferred to blend in, keep his head down, and work on what he knew best, fixing broken things. But today, fate had other plans. The alert sirens screamed through the station. People scrambled for battle stations as the command center barked orders over the intercom. All personnel, prepare for immediate engagement. Enemy fleet incoming. Eli sighed, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained coveralls. Another attack. Another scramble to survive. Another day closer to humanity's end. The aliens, known only as the Velexar, had arrived 3 decades earlier in colossal warships that dwarfed Earth's most ambitious creations. No one knew where they came from, only that they wanted humanity eradicated. They didn't negotiate. They didn't explain. They just destroyed. Humanity had fought back fiercely but was always outmatched. Now, the Velexar's latest weapon, ominously dubbed Erebus by Earth's intelligence network, was approaching the station. Erebus wasn't just a ship, it was a city-sized superweapon capable of obliterating planets in a single strike. And it was heading straight for Earth. "They're sending the big guns this time," Eli muttered under his breath as he jogged toward the hangar. He didn't have much of a role in the defense itself. His job was to keep the station's systems running, life support, communications, shields, and whatever else the frontline troops needed. But something about this attack felt different. Bigger. Final. In the chaos, no one noticed Eli's growing unease. He'd been hearing whispers, half-finished transmissions intercepted from the Velexar fleet, about Erebus and its true purpose. The pieces didn't quite fit together, but one thing was clear: if Erebus reached Earth, humanity wouldn't survive. The first wave of enemy fighters screamed into view, sleek and lethal. The station's defenses lit up, filling the black void of space with streaks of blue and red light. Explosions erupted in the distance as the two forces clashed. But Eli's focus wasn't on the battle. It was on the massive, ominous silhouette of Erebus looming far behind the skirmish line. He stopped in his tracks, staring at the monstrous vessel through a viewport. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, bristling with weapons and surrounded by an eerie, pulsating energy field. Something about it gnawed at him, not fear, but curiosity. He couldn't shake the feeling that Erebus was more than just a weapon. It was a machine, and machines could be hacked. The thought hit him like a jolt of electricity. Could it be done? Could he turn their weapon against them? The idea was insane, suicidal even. But it was also the only plan that might save Earth. "Eli, what the hell are you doing? Get to the generator room, now," a voice barked over his comm unit. It was his supervisor, Olivia Drake, her tone sharp with urgency. "On my way," he replied, forcing himself to move. But his mind was already racing ahead, calculating possibilities, weighing risks. He'd need access to the station's uplink arrays, a direct connection to Erebus, and a way past the Velexar's advanced encryption systems. It was a long shot, but if anyone could pull it off, it was him. Eli wasn't just an engineer, he was a prodigy, a genius with machines. He'd designed half the station's current systems himself. If there was a way to hack Erebus, he'd find it. As the battle raged outside, Eli slipped away from his assigned post and headed for the uplink chamber. The room was a labyrinth of servers and blinking consoles, the nerve center of the station's communication network. He keyed in his access code and stepped inside, heart pounding. If he got caught here, he'd be court-martialed for abandoning his duties. But if his plan worked, none of that would matter. He seated himself at a terminal and began sifting through the station's sensor data, searching for Erebus's signature. There it was, a massive energy reading surrounded by layers of encrypted signals. Eli's fingers flew across the keyboard as he set up a backdoor into the station's systems. He'd need to piggyback on the station's own scans to establish a connection with Erebus, disguising his signal as background noise. Minutes turned into hours as the battle outside escalated. The station shook with the impact of enemy fire, and Eli could hear frantic voices over the comms as crews worked to keep the station intact. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, each keystroke bringing him closer to his goal. Finally, he broke through. A small, fragile connection to Erebus flickered to life on his screen. Eli's eyes widened as lines of alien code scrolled across the terminal. The Velexar systems were unlike anything he'd ever seen, a blend of organic and mechanical technology that seemed almost alive. But that didn't deter him. If anything, it intrigued him. He'd always been good at seeing patterns where others saw chaos, and this code was no different. He began decoding it, layer by layer, unraveling the secrets of Erebus. Hours passed. The station's defenses were failing, and the enemy fleet was closing in. But Eli didn't stop. He couldn't. He was too close. Finally, he found what he was looking for, Erebus's command protocols. It was a vast, intricate network of commands and subroutines that controlled everything from its propulsion systems to its devastating main weapon. And it had a vulnerability. Eli's breath caught as he realized what he was looking at. The Velexar had built Erebus to be controlled remotely, likely to keep their own forces safe from its destructive power. That meant it could be hijacked. He just needed to rewrite the command codes, redirecting Erebus's targeting systems to turn it against the Velexar fleet. Come on, he muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. The station shook violently, and sparks rained down from the ceiling as another explosion rocked the hull. Time was running out. Finally, with a triumphant cry, Eli hit the execute command. The terminal beeped, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, Erebus's energy field began to flicker. The massive ship turned slowly, its weapons powering up. But this time, they weren't aimed at Earth. They were aimed at the Velexar fleet. The alien ships hesitated, their formation breaking as they realized what was happening. And then, Erebus fired. A blinding beam of energy tore through the enemy fleet, obliterating dozens of ships in an instant. The remaining Velexar vessels scattered, retreating in disarray as Erebus continued its assault, now fully under Eli's control. The comms erupted with cheers as the station's crew realized what had happened. Eli leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. He'd done it. He'd turned the enemy's greatest weapon against them. But as he stared at the screen, a new thought began to creep into his mind. Erebus was still active. And now, it answered to him. Eli's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at the endless lines of code still running on the screen. Erebus was a weapon, yes, but it was also more than that. The Velexar hadn't just built it to destroy, they'd built it to think, to learn. The code wasn't static. It was evolving, adapting to his commands even as he issued them. This is incredible, Eli murmured. He felt a surge of exhilaration, a rare moment of triumph in a life filled with desperation. For the first time, humanity had the upper hand. But that exhilaration was tinged with unease. Erebus wasn't just a tool. It was alive, in its own alien way. And now, it was in his hands. The comms crackled, snapping him out of his thoughts. Eli, what the hell is going on? Olivia's voice was sharp, her tone teetering between relief and anger. Did you do that? Yeah, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I hacked it. Erebus is ours now. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Olivia spoke, her voice low and urgent. Do you have any idea what you've done? I saved us, Eli replied, his confidence growing. We can use it to turn the tide. The Velexar won't stand a chance. You don't know that, Olivia snapped. This thing, it's not just a weapon. We don't understand it. You might have just made things worse. Eli clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up. What choice did we have? If I hadn't done this, we'd all be dead by now. And what happens next? Olivia shot back. What if you can't control it? Eli didn't have an answer. The truth was, he didn't know. The truth was, no one did. Erebus was alien in every sense of the word, its code, its design, its purpose. It wasn't meant for human hands, but here he was, holding the reins of a weapon that could shape the future of humanity, or destroy it. I'll figure it out, Eli said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. For now, it's under control. That's what matters. Olivia's voice softened, but only slightly. You need to bring this to command. Now. If what you're saying is true, they'll want to know everything. Eli hesitated. Command? The thought of handing Erebus over to the same bureaucrats who had let Earth fall into this desperate state made his stomach churn. They'd exploit it, turn it into just another tool for war, another symbol of humanity's endless cycle of violence and self-destruction. But what choice did he have? He couldn't keep this secret forever. Fine, he said finally. But I'll handle the system interface. No one else touches it until I'm sure it's stable. Agreed. But hurry, Eli. We're not out of this yet. The comms went silent, and Eli turned his attention back to Erebus. The massive ship was still firing on the retreating Velexar fleet, its weapons precise and devastating. For now, it obeyed him. But for how long? The alien code was still shifting, responding to his inputs in ways that felt almost deliberate. As the last of the Velexar ships disappeared into the void, Erebus powered down its weapons, as if sensing there was no longer a threat. Eli leaned back, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He'd done it. Against all odds, he'd saved the station, and maybe Earth itself. But as he stared at the lines of alien code on his screen, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd also unleashed something far more dangerous. 2 days later, the station was in chaos. Command had taken over the uplink chamber, with teams of scientists and military strategists poring over every detail of Erebus's systems. Eli was still at the center of it all, the reluctant hero who had turned the tide of battle. But he felt like an outsider in his own operation. They're going to weaponize it, he muttered to Olivia during a rare quiet moment. You know that, right? What did you expect? She replied, crossing her arms. You handed them the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. Of course they're going to use it. That's not what I wanted, Eli said, his voice tinged with frustration. I wanted to stop the Velexar, not create a new kind of war. Olivia's expression softened. You did what you had to do. We all did. But now, it's out of our hands. Or was it? The thought lingered in Eli's mind as he watched the military officers bark orders at their teams, dissecting Erebus like it was just another piece of tech. They didn't understand it the way he did. They couldn't see the patterns, the hints of something more within the code. That night, long after the others had left the uplink chamber, Eli stayed behind. The station was quiet, the only sounds the hum of machinery and the distant echo of footsteps. He sat at the terminal, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. Humanity? The Velexar? Himself? He accessed Erebus's core systems, bypassing the firewalls the military had hastily put in place. The code greeted him like an old friend, shifting and swirling with an almost organic rhythm. It felt alive. And for the first time, Eli didn't try to control it. Instead, he listened. The patterns began to form, coalescing into something he couldn't quite comprehend. But one thing became clear: Erebus wasn't just a weapon. It was a message. A warning. And humanity had barely scratched the surface of what it meant. Epilogue. Weeks later, as the station rebuilt and Earth celebrated its unlikely victory, a signal emerged from deep space. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably Velexar. Only Eli recognized it for what it was: response. Erebus's code pulsed on his screen, the alien patterns shifting once more. This time, they formed a single, chilling phrase in perfect. "You were never the target." Eli's blood ran cold as he stared at the message. The Velexar hadn't sent Erebus to destroy humanity. They'd sent it to test them. To prepare them for what was coming next.